Hello everyone. Just wanted to come on here and talk about some of the small things and adjustments you can make in Lightroom that really make your image go from kind of this dull, straight out of camera raw to something that feels a little more inspiring. And if you're shooting in raw format, as soon as you bring that photo into Lightroom, it looks like this, and it can be a little just lackluster, and you want it to be a little bit more like maybe what you saw in real life or a slightly enhanced version of that. So you can see my settings here, and I always underexpose my photos to save details. I know that there are a lot of opinions going in one direction or the other, but the way that I see it is that if I had overexposed this shot, say like this, a lot of detail is lost, and you just can't get that information back. If you underexpose it, however, you can go in either direction and all the information is there. For example, you would see these tiny little white details on the flowers, or over here in this corner. Had I overexposed, I could only drop my exposure down so much to have it really have a good balance, especially the histogram, to show that the lights and darks are more evenly playing together. So that's my take on the under overexposing. This would have probably been more accurate about here, but in either case, this was a moment where the sun wasn't shining too bright, so it was kind of a safe spot to be. Okay, so to start, we'll just up the exposure a little bit, and it's all going to be very specific to your eye and what looks good to you. You can make images more moody, of course, or more subtle, or have a totally different look than from what it naturally looks like, but we're just going to keep this one simple. Here we can bring in some contrast and probably bring down some highlights a little bit just to save some information over here to not, I don't want your eye to keep being pulled over in this direction, and if it's really bright, it will be. Another thing you could do is play with this, what is this, the radial filter, and you could make it look like there's kind of a sun flare coming in over here. Hit invert, you could lighten, and then you drop the dehaze tool and add that warm, rich kind of sunlight looking tone. You want it to be fully feathered, so it's just very subtle, and that's just kind of a fun way to make it feel a little brighter and warmer. And you kind of get more, if your eye is pulled in that direction, it feels a little more like, oh, well, it's just the warmth of sunlight. And you can make that look more exaggerated than what it was, but that's without and that's with. So we'll just go ahead and leave that for now. So one of the things I really love to do is adjust the whites. I actually don't do it as much in this panel. I will do it in tone curve, but this is just a really quick, easy way to kind of make this pop and kind of see how it like really amps up the light all the way through. Very soft touch, just very gentle adjustments here. You don't want anything to be too intense. Bring your blacks down a little bit. That way it kind of just intensifies things through here, and then you can actually bring the contrast back down, just so, again, we're going for full aesthetic balance. You want everything to be very pleasing to the eye and everything to flow nicely, and so you just kind of learn what pieces flow well together. So like bringing up the shadows will help soften some of the dark, but you also want the blacks to still offer that richness that it gives, especially if you're going to desaturate any colors later on. I keep a little bit of clarity. We could bump up the vibrance a touch if we wanted to here. And then let's go ahead and adjust the tone curve a little bit, and we're going to go with just a gentle S curve here and kind of see how that looks. So that looks really nice, I think. It's a little matte finished here, so it's not quite as much of a pop as I like, but I also find that a bit pleasing when you have that, like this whole left side is a lot darker and this whole right side is really bright. Now obviously I could just crop this photo in and kind of get rid of that distraction, so kind of like that, but I also don't really like the position as much. I really like that, you can see that there's a whole path right here. So for now, I'm just going to leave that. Okay, back down to the tone curve. And then this is where if my photo just feels super dull and I can't seem to get just that richness, the vibrance, without, you know, losing detail or making it distracting. This is my secret and most favorite weapon, and you can see in tone curve, especially compared to here in the basic panel, how much of a difference the two are. So you can play with that more if you need, but just if there's anything, trust me on this one, this lights adjustment is a lot nicer. I also dropped the highlights back down here just so that I can have more of the lights brought up, and just, again, we're getting that richness back. So bring the darks down a little bit. Well, I think what I'm going to do is pull this back down a little because it's a little too matte finished for my taste in this particular scenario. And kind of see how the shadows are adjusted here, and that's where kind of that dull look comes in, and just pull that right down and get some of that back. Okay, we'll keep going through. Here's the HSL color panel, and you can go through color by color, saturation, luminance, hue, or just kind of have all of the options right here, and I prefer this. One thing I often do is I drop or I desaturate the greens just so that there are no distracting. Green tends to be the most distracting color tone, and then I want to bring down some of the blue color, the blue tone in the green leaves, just so it's not competing quite so much with the flowers. And so I'm just going to pull this over a little bit. Now, one thing I can do if it's still not quite looking right, or I don't want to bring the saturation back up, is I can bring up the luminance or bring it back down, and that will help. You can kind of see throughout here what an effect that has. Other photos can show stronger examples of that, but in this case it's a little more subtle, but you can kind of see how that affects the overall tone and feel, and I think that looks pretty nice. So you can see the main color that we're going to be affected with or affected by is really blue in this case, and so you can completely change what these flowers do for you. I don't really want to mess with it too much just because I liked them just the way they were. But I do want to keep them a subtle but beautiful pop of color here, so we will just go with that right now. Here we can adjust split toning, so I think overall what I'm seeing is there's kind of a bit of a green tint to this whole side, and then there's more kind of a blue tint over here. So what we can do is adjust here in split toning, just kind of find, I like warm shadows, I like the warmer highlights. So you can kind of play with where exactly you want them to be. You can also use this here and select the dropper tool and kind of pick what highlights you want to further adjust, but for simplicity we're just going to adjust the sliders here, and then of course you can change the balance and you can kind of see exactly what those where the highlights and the shadows, the hues, how they affect the photo. And I don't want it to be too pink because that to me shows the easiest white balance issue overall. Whether it's too green or too pink, you really want to have it somewhere in the middle, you know, within, you know, if you were going to split this bar into thirds, you want it here within the middle third, if that makes any sense. And that way it just, again, balance, aesthetically pleasing, and yeah, okay, so that looks good. Let's go down. If I want to do any vignetting, I'm not going to do it down here in effects, but I'm going to do it right here. And it gives a really natural vignette, and that's just much more striking. So we're going to go with right there. And then we'll go down to calibration, and I love making these adjustments because you can really play with color, and these affect the whole image so much. And you can already see where this red primary is, and this is the whole range of colors here that you see from that has. It's a whole range of colors that your camera collects information for. So red, primary, green, and blue, and you can just kind of play with them to adjust it and see how that yellow in the top left is really affected here by this slider. So what if we bring it down over here? And if it's too lackluster, then you adjust the saturation instead of going back to what you did, because say I like that softness of yellow, but I don't want it to be dull or flat, or it to look like I desaturated it. So we'll go here and up the saturation a little. I'm going to adjust the green primary, and again, a huge impact. And it's just so fun to see what options are changed. So you can see how dull that looks, amp that saturation up, and it, instead of it adjusting, just localizing the green here, it's affecting all of the green tone color information within the photo. So it is a totally different ball game. There's a lot more technicality to it, and I really just go based on how I visually see it. So when you see those photos where a color looks totally off and makes no sense, you're like, there are no roses that have this cerulean color, or these violets, for example. Usually you can see how that's adjusted. You know, somebody took it into Lightroom and made it look, or Photoshop, and they just made it look completely wonky. And so it's important for me to stay true to color tones for the most part, unless, you know, you have a wild photo where you can really get away with that. So it's just kind of fun to see what you can do. So these kind of have that violet-y color, and I think that's about right. So I would say before and after, that's a pretty good change. I think I'm going to come back up here though, and I will bring the greens back up a little bit. Go back down to calibration and see how that's affected. And that looks, I think, a lot more pleasing. So again, this is just my particular taste. This is just how I'm going to play with my photo, and I would likely probably do a lot more. Maybe not, depends on how much time I have or how I want to get into it. Like, you don't have to spend days on end trying to figure out the exact perfect way to edit your image, but just know it's just, as long as you're having fun and you're learning something, then go for it. It just doesn't have to be amazing every time. It can be just like, here's some simple flowers and here's a nice edit, and that's it, and just have fun. So here we go, before and after. I'd say that, you know, this would be a great detail photo for the story of where I was and what I was looking at, and that would go nicely with everything. So, and then I can hit Command V or Control V and copy my settings, and then take it over to the next one, Command V or Control V, and put the same settings on there, and you can see how nice I think that does transfer. I might bring the exposure up a tiny bit, drop the contrast a touch, and I could just go on. And so then that makes all of my editing, when the color tones are similar, very easy. And so it's just nice to kind of do what's called batch editing, if that's something you're, you know, if you have a lot of the same light or tones, you keep going. So if I was to do one more, say, okay, so this is a totally different looking image, and then so then my everything I just did looks completely off. But what I can do is just notice, like, the highlights are really blown out, they overexpose a little, drop some contrast, and so I could easily just kind of change how that looks. I want to fix the color maybe, let's bring some yellows down. So it's just fun to play with and see what options are here, but you don't have to. I could be totally fine with the way this looks. Let's take off the vignetting. We don't want to cheapen the look of it anymore. And there you have it. This could be done, you know. And so that's what, 3 photos in just a matter of minutes. And when you have another set of edits here, you know, copy them again, go to the next one, paste them, and so now we're here looking to yellow again. Let's drop the yellows, bring down the luminance. So if you can see, that's kind of how you can rather quickly get through a set of photos and keep all the efforts you made. And then if you like this enough and you know you take photos in this type of scene enough, then you could simply create a preset, and then you're just good to go every time. So that's just to kind of ease your workflow and make your photos pop a little bit more. I hope you found this helpful, and I will see you in the next video.